recording in progress. So if you want to not be on Zoom, you can turn off your cameras or leave them on. My name is Norma Gallegos. I'm a member of the Freedom Socialist Party and Radical Women, the organization that initiated the national mobilization for reproductive justice when it became clear that the movement was necessary to fight for reproductive justice. The global assault on women and people with uteri by far right-wing governments across the world knows no borders. It is for this reason that reproductive justice activists continue to resist in a way that bolsters our connections and internationalism to the right to bodily autonomy. In Australia, they have no federal protection for abortion. Thanks to movement organizing, all jurisdictions have decriminalized the procedure, but Aboriginal women are still battling against forced sterilization and separation from their children. There are many similarities with our southern continent neighbors, especially after the loss of Roe v. Wade in the United States. However, I cannot mourn. I very much prefer to organize and work with others to protect reproductive rights and restore and expand abortion federally. So it is my honor in introducing Debbie as someone who has long pushed my own activism in the reproductive justice movement. Debbie Brennan is an Australian organizer with the Freedom Socialist Party and Radical Women. She has decades of experience going against the far right and emerging fascists with community activists in Melbourne. She is a longtime unionist in the National Union of Workers in Australia. The Fertility Control Clinic, Australia's first abortion clinic, founded in 1972, has been a primary target of the right. In 1989, Debbie participated in the Campaign for Women's Reproductive Rights to keep Medicare funding for abortions, and over the years has been outside defending the gates. Both Radical Women and CWRR defended the clinic for 11 years. Please welcome Debbie in thumbs up or clapping with us. So Debbie, this has been such a long time, and in this moment that we are needing to hear from global activists such as yourself, please tell us how you got involved fighting for reproductive rights.
Well, it was back in the 1980s when things were getting pretty hot around abortion rights. And as you just said, Norma, Australia never had federal protection. We never had a Roe versus Wade. And at that time, abortion was under, well, it still is, under the jurisdiction state by state. And in every state, it was a crime. So at that time, things were afoot. For example, there was a right-wing senator who was working to take Medicare funding away from abortion. So that would have made it obviously even more restrictive for women. Right to Life was very busy at that time. And they were not only constantly harassing clinics like the fertility control clinic that you mentioned, but they were holding their annual walks for little feet. So there were just constant confrontations going on. So when this was all going on, I was trying to plug into how can I get involved as part of the fight? And it was actually through Radical Women, it's by meeting Radical Women that I was able to do that. So really, since that time, I've been at it for the past decades, but it is thanks to that grassroots organizing that Radical Women had been involved in, and as you said, Radical Women initiated the Campaign for Women's Reproductive Rights in 1989 to fight that removal of Medicare for abortion.
Thanks, Debbie. You're mentioning a lot of things that are happening currently in the United States, and I would love to know a little bit more about why this fight is so essential. I mean, to make the cross connection between what's happening in the United States and what has been occurring, the experience that you have, and what is the situation currently right now in Australia, especially with the United States losing Roe v. Wade.
Well, just to make the point again that we never had a Roe v. Wade. In most states, since the time I was talking about, abortion has been decriminalized, but that was after decades and decades of long, hard, persistent, tenacious fights. In Victoria, where Melbourne is, abortion was decriminalized only in 2008. That was the second state to decriminalize, so you can see how recent this is. The most recent, or the final state to decriminalize was just last year. So it's really been a long slog. But what's still the case is that this tiny minority is still at it. And their immediate aim is to recriminalize abortion everywhere. Certainly in Victoria, that is the case. And so from the year of the decriminalization of abortion in Victoria, this far-right member of parliament has been leading marches for the babies every year, which we were at just recently in October. But even though abortion is decriminalized, the situation is still pretty grim across Australia, certainly in Victoria. So that for a lot of women, abortion, they cannot access abortion, either because it's too costly, so therefore the demand for free abortion on demand is absolutely crucial. But for other women, particularly in rural areas, there are not services. There are not many doctors that would actually perform an abortion. So it's actually inaccessible in a lot of rural areas. And the cost just becomes even worse because they've got to come to the cities for a few days to be able to access that if they have the money. So that's pretty much the situation. But since Roe versus Wade was overturned, it's become even worse. That has emboldened the far right. We've been able to keep them at bay all of this time, but Roe versus Wade is bringing them out of the gutters. And we know that they're not only after abortion, and as everyone here would know, since Roe v. Wade was revoked, they're going after everything. And there is, for example, in Australia, there's a bill called a religious discrimination bill that almost came in about a year, maybe 2 years ago, but that is still sitting on a shelf. And we know that that bill is going to come back at some point when it's considered a timely thing to do. That's going to be going after women, not only around abortion, but women being employed in schools that do not approve of women who have been divorced, for example. It's certainly going to be impacting in a big way LGBTIQA plus people, people of color, people with disabilities. It would enable employers and institutions to discriminate against anyone they want to, just because of their religious beliefs. So we've got that coming. And of course, we've got the far right that is organizing.
Exactly, Debbie. You mentioned did you say March for Babies? This connection of what we're going to be facing here in San Francisco, this perception of the religious right wing, and, bringing in folks that, are a spectrum of the far right. And I just wanted to ask this connection between the rise of fascism and the attacks of abortion, reproductive and abortion rights, but say a little bit more of what the implications are, and, just the, who are we dealing with? This ideology.
Yeah, it's fighting for reproductive rights and fighting the far right and up and coming fascists. They're just indivisible fights. I find it easy to understand that connection, just to think of the basic fact that human labor produces profits. Women's reproduction supplies that human labor. So that is the basis of everything that we're dealing with right now. So that when the economy goes pear-shaped at any time, it's that the pressure on women to be reproducing that human labor gets even more intense. And that's what we're facing right now. We're facing an economy in extreme crisis, as we all know, no matter where we are. Before I tell you a bit more about that, I think I need to also stress, though, that that's for some women, but there's a eugenics in all of this. There's a eugenics, there's always has been in population control, wherever we may be. And the fact is that First Nations women, women with disability, LGBTIQ women, poor women, have never had the right to either have children or to keep their children. So these measures have been in place throughout Australian history, and they're certainly in place now. So we've got these different standards. When that pressure is on for women to reproduce, it's for certain women to reproduce. So if we look at the economic crisis right now, women have to fit into the economy's needs. That's what this system dictates. And so just recently, for example, with labor shortages, well, going back to 2006, I should say, when the conservative federal government was trying to deal with a recession or an oncoming recession back then, there was a lot of pressure, not only on women to have more kids. We were told by the treasurer, the federal treasurer, to have 3 kids, one for the father, one for the mother, and one for the country, if you can believe that. But at the same time, the far-right health minister would not allow RU486 into the country. So then just last year, no, 2 years ago, right during the COVID, women were told again, stop your birth strike. You need to breed more because the economy absolutely needs it. At the same time, the federal government cut child care. So they're telling us to have kids, and they're cutting anything that would, another aspect of our reproductive rights. Oh, and the far right, sorry, I should say.
Absolutely. Debbie, there's the rage, the anger, all these, the most impacted folks who this is going to impact, we know. Tell me a little bit more about how the channeling of our energies into the organizing and the fight back, because I've learned a lot about the work that you've done with the United for Reproductive Justice group, and would love to instill this need to continue the movement, to build a movement, to make it inclusive, to bring intersectionality into it, because if they're united on that side, our side needs to be as united, or even more so.
More united, better organized. Well, Radical Women has always fought for more than abortion. Part and parcel of Radical Women's organizing has always been around intersectional demands of reproductive justice. So it has it makes those connections that I've made before with women whose reproduction is actually not even allowed. So that has been absolutely central to radical women's organizing and uniting around. At the same time, we have put the importance of unions up front, because after all, not only are working class women and oppressed women in the unions, but the unions have their power to unite everyone, the entire working class, around reproductive justice. So besides some of those things that we've already mentioned in the past, yes, we, radical women, recently initiated United for Reproductive Justice. We did that because of the recognition that attacks are coming our way. Even though the monster may not be directly in front of our faces, we know it's coming. So United for Reproductive Justice, its first work was to build a contingent to a counter action that had been organized against this year's March for the Babies. And so we organized around agreed demands, agreed multi-issue demands that first and foremost address the need for a federal law for free, safe abortion on demand, but also addressing the reproductive needs of all women, including trans women and non-binary people. So we've got 10 demands addressing all of that. We had a large contingent, which involved in organizing that contingent were union activists, were First Nations justice activists, disability activists, prisoner rights activists, anarchists, socialists, and so on. So we did actually bring, a lot of people came in to the organizing of that contingent. So what we need to do now is broaden that, to build that, because the March for the Babies has come and gone until next year. But between now and then, there is a lot of broadening not only within across movements, but broadening into the communities of those most targeted by the far right and most affected by the assaults on reproductive rights.
Organizing is the most important thing that we can do, but we always face roadblocks. So what are some of the issues and disagreements in the movements? I read an open letter that your group published, so I'd love to learn more about how we can work better together, but also name the issues, say what's the disagreements.
There are three main roadblocks that I can see. One is liberal feminists who are still, the system treats them as the voice of feminism and reproductive rights, which is far from the fact. But liberal feminism, I think that you face the same thing here. They believe in the system as it is. They believe that a little reform is the end of the story, and there's no fight to be had anymore. They deny the dangers of the far right. They do not like grassroots activism. They will not work with grassroots activists. In the meantime, while attacks are either coming their way or are right there happening to us at that moment, they won't even mobilize. I'll just give an example. Just a couple of days ago in Melbourne, the Pride Center in Melbourne was going to hold an event for young queer people. Proud Boys and Nazis were threatening the event. Immediately, grassroots, organizing was happening. Call-outs were going out. But in the meantime, the Pride Center, which would be an example of an NGO, canceled the event. So it was a win for the Proud Boys and the fascists. But nevertheless, that call that brought people to defend that event, they still came. So, but that is the role that liberal feminists and NGOs generally play. The other roadblock is union bureaucracies who do not really see reproductive justice as a central union movement issue. They will, from time to time, come out to things and speak at rallies, but the mobilization of the grassroots or the rank and file is not there. That is in direct contrast to rank and file unionists who are very much there and very much involved in this. And the opportunity, well, you flagged the March for the Babies this year. The organizers of the counter demonstration, the Victorian Socialists, were running for state election at that time. It turned out that that counteraction was really a publicity stunt for them. So they did a bit of risky business, established with the cops and so on, which put a lot of people, some people were pepper sprayed and so on. But even more than that, they then ended the counteraction before the March for the Babies even came. So there was no counteraction. So it's that opportunism of sections, just sections of the left who will take up something because it's good for them, but then drop it. Or they would never democratically organize and they would be able to, play whatever games they care to game. And that's what happens when an organization puts itself above the movement.
Well, we certainly believe in solidarity and continuing this important fight in this movement as it's worldwide that all these things are happening. But what are the next steps for the reproductive justice movement in Australia? Are we in a period of slowing down, or can we build it up?
Well, we have to build it up. And I think you all feel it here in the United States, and we certainly feel it in Australia. And what's needed, first of all, is to really continue that multi-issue approach, to be striving for either united fronts or strong coalitions around agreed demands that everybody will unite around, and which is exactly what United for Reproductive Justice is doing, which is exactly what I know Bay Area Reproductive Justice, the National Mobilization for Reproductive Justice, is doing here, and that is absolutely mighty powerful. The other thing is to go where the most affected are. So that is, we need to not only be reaching out to the established movements, which is absolutely important, but we need to go to the communities where people may not necessarily be in those movements, but to go to the communities of the Sudanese refugees, for example, the communities of the homeless, around housing issues, and so on and so forth, and make those links, make those relationships, because frankly, that's where the militancy is going to be coming from. It's from those communities of those most oppressed by the system, done over by the system, targeted in terms of reproductive rights, who are going to be bringing the energy and the power and the militancy to our unions. So we really do have to build that movement. It's about movement building, but it's got to be democratic movement building. It's got to be militant union, militant movement building, where we're all accountable to each other. One thing I just like to say to show the positive potential for all of this is the fact that it is an international fight, and we're here today because we recognize it's international, and we need to make those links. But that decision by the U.S. Supreme Court had a global nature to it. We've been talking about it as far as Australia is concerned. The way in which it has involved in the far right around the world, the way it has alerted to reproductive rights warriors around the world of what is coming in one form or another. As soon as the huge marches and protests hit the streets here. In Australia, there were solidarity protests in cities across the country. And in Melbourne alone, we were 15,000 people who came out in Melbourne in solidarity with the United States. And so it is powerful. People do make the connections. That Melbourne protest was angry, and it was predominantly young women. And they weren't going to stop at anything. And that's what we need. It's there. We just need to channel it, and channel it internationally and make our links organized internationally. We want to organize with Bay Area and the national mobilization for reproductive justice. So, let's do it.
Give a clap or a thumbs up or a.